Hello and welcome to a Taylor's Tales podcast. This is Chris's Corner. I'm your host, Chris Taylor, and we're back this week with an ally of the many, the traverser of the underworld, the man himself. It's Ollie Deacon. How you doing, Ollie?
I'm really good, thank you, mate. And you?
I'm fantastic. I'm with you again, mate. We're going through Batman. This is it. This is the new series, finally. And
Yeah, we waited a while to get here.
wait, you guys haven't seen it yet, but me and Ollie have been planning this for a while. We've had to, through my bad and disorganized manner, I should have pre-recorded this a while ago, but this is just how life goes in the pandemic at the moment. But we're grateful for Ollie to be here because this is going to be one of my favorite series, I think, so far, because there's so much depth to the characters we're going to be covering. So straight off the mark, straight in. We're going to be doing an overview today of Batman. And I'm going to start in by talking about the animated series, some of the animated, overview of the Batman series. And I think, Ollie, I'd love to know from you personally, do you have a specific series or specific movie that comes to mind that's just like, bang, that's my favorite, I'm in?
Well, I mean, and there are a lot, obviously. The one that springs to mind, the one that's been kind of in my head a lot lately is the Dark Knight Returns, which is the animated one that came out I think it came out in 2012, and it's a two-part series. And the first part is the story is adapted from Frank Miller's story, which came out in the 80s, which is called The Dark Knight Returns. And basically, Batman, he's older and he's been retired for about 10 years. And there's obviously echoes of it in The Dark Knight Rises, the film. But basically, he's been retired for a while, but Bruce Wayne hasn't moved on. He's not actually started to live. And Gotham has been falling to ruin basically since he left, because all the thugs knew that he'd gone. And so the story picks up, and there's this gang called the Mutants, and they're basically going around terrorizing Gotham, and they're led by this ruthless leader. I won't spoil the story too much, although we probably will at some point in this podcast. But it's probably one of the better stories. I think it captures the spirit of Batman a lot better than a lot of other films have. I think partly because it's not live action, you can still have the sort of fantasy elements. And so Superman is a character in part two, and it's the story where they have a fight, and it's where, if you saw Batman v Superman, the fights they have in that film is based on the fight they have in The Dark Knight Returns, and it's just absolutely brilliant because Bruce, he doesn't hold back. He's not a nice man, and he absolutely annihilates Clark or Superman.
So could I clarify as well? When he's fighting Superman, does he use the suit which has the krypton? Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah,
that's so cool.
Yeah, it is brilliant. And it's even the same shot. If you remember in Batman v Superman, when Bruce fires the grenade launcher and Superman catches it and then it explodes in his face, there's a similar shot in the comic book, in the animated story. Except it's an arrow that's shot by Oliver Queen, who's the Green Arrow in the story.
Oh, no way. Do they team up in this at all, Batman and...
Yeah, a little bit. He isn't featured in it too much, but he is part of the sort of the end game, if you like. And yeah, and Superman catches the arrow at the last second, and it's got a kryptonite tip, but it still explodes in his face. And so then Bruce lays the beat down on him. So...
That's a fantastic...
It's fucking brilliant. If you haven't seen it, it's fucking brilliant.
I love it. And my first thought from that, you said that Batman's spirit is captured. And I wanted to ask, how would you define Batman's spirit? Because there's so many different depictions of it.
I'm not really sure I could define it. I know there's a lot of ideas I have. But I think the character is actually borderline... He's bordering on being an actual archetype, and so it has this element where the character is constantly evolving in the minds of the fans, but also actually in the stories that we see. And so it's like you can't ever quite nail down the perfect element, the perfect character, but sometimes it can come close. And I just think that whatever it is, whatever essence that I can get from it, it's captured very well in The Dark Knight Returns. And likewise, it's also captured very well in Batman v Superman by Ben Affleck, because he's Bruce Wayne as the character. He plays the part of a billionaire playboy, and he plays the part of a bit of a drunk, bit of a womanizer, not really taking too much responsibility, so on and so forth. And Ben Affleck plays that really well in the story. But then the actual character of the Batman is, it's the genius detective, the inventor, crime fighter, the martial artist, and a whole list of other traits. And again, Ben Affleck's Batman captures it absolutely brilliantly. In my less than humble opinion, is that the best cinematic fight scene, or the best fight scene in cinematic history, in my opinion, is the warehouse fight scene in Batman v Superman. And the part of the reason for that is because it captures the gadgets and the skill and the brutality of the character of the Batman just absolutely perfectly. Because it starts out, the particular fight scene he starts using gadgets, and he spreads everyone around and creates loads of mayhem and distractions, and then he's just beating the fuck out of everyone. It's absolutely brilliant, that particular scene. So the actual character of Batman, nailing it down is very difficult, but there are certain elements that are done very well, and obviously Christian Bale's is very good, but it's less accurate, I would say, than Ben Affleck's. But,
yeah. I love what you focused on there, something that immediately comes to mind when I think of Batman and brutality. You focused in on that word. This is why I'm excited to see the next Batman. The one that, the 2012, it was meant to be 2021, but it looks, the line when, and Robert Pattinson is going to be playing him, and when he says, "I am vengeance," and that scene where he's just like bang, 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 it's the repetitive, like, just brutality of that attack that I just thought to myself, that's Batman. That's him right there. And there's a little bit of, I don't see that in Christian Bale's performance, and I know we're going to cover this in the series, but in The Dark Knight Rises, it feels like he finally gets to that point right at the end of the movie rather than in the entire series, which is kind of like, it feels kind of restrained in somewhere or another. So I think what I'm trying to get at here in the next sort of question I wanted to know was that in the animated series, do you feel that brutality is shown because they have the ability to animate and they have no sort of bounds in the real world, sort of?
It's less so, and I think the reason for that is partly because the audience is intended to be children mostly. Although I listened to an interview with the creators of the animated series a little while ago, and they said that they didn't want to just have a child's audience. They wanted something that adults could watch and enjoy as well. And so I think that there's a limitation you have with cartoon-like animation, because you can't capture movement in the same way you can with, say, animation like CGI. Like the film Kung Fu Panda.
Yeah.
Like, brilliant, like, fighting in it. I don't think you can do that with drawing or with cartoon-like animation. So the fighting is less of a draw, but I think the character of Batman is very well established in the animated series. And I think actually the animated series is partly responsible for the idea that the modern generation might have of the character, because that was the inspiration behind a lot of the films, despite some of them being quite childish. But as I was saying, the Dark Knight Returns is kind of an exception to that, I think, because it's just brilliant.
Yeah. And although I haven't seen The Dark Knight Returns, I have seen a lot of the sort of movies around it. You mentioned the Batman's a little bit older in this series. It immediately reminds me of when we see the Joker when he's a little bit older and he appears on TV, and I can't remember which Batman movie, but it is one of the most
That's the one.
brutal sort of versions of Batman and the Joker fighting each other. I don't know if you remember that at all.
Yeah, that's the one. It's in Dark Knight Rises, the Dark Knight Returns.
Ah,
It's when they end up in a fairground, and Joker has just shot loads of people, loads of innocent people, and Batman is just beating him up. And the Joker stabs him a few times and stuff like that. Yeah, it's that one. That's what I'm talking about.
yeah. And it is for me personally, that end scene, it's almost as if, you know, I don't want to say he won, but it does feel like the Joker won in some way or another, because it felt like Batman had lost in the sense that he hadn't gained the higher ground, he hadn't captured him. It was like, you know, in a, you know, quoting a different movie, but the Killing Joke in one way or another, you know, in that sort of way. So, you know, linking to that, do you feel that you felt like me? Did you feel that sort of like, that wasn't the right ending for me, or were you okay with it?
No, I was okay with that actually, and the reason I think that is because it's the little conversation they're having as they're fighting. Is the Joker says, how many people have I killed, or something. And Batman, Bruce knows the answer straight away, and it's because he kept counts of all the people. So from Bruce's perspective, he is responsible for all of the people that Joker has killed, because he's always been released and he's always gotten out of Arkham Asylum and stuff. And so he feels like he's responsible for that, and so he bears the burden of that. And so I think he's at the end of his tether, and he just realizes that there is actually no hope for the Joker. There's no rehabilitation. And so the only solution is to just kill him. Because he says to the Robin, it's not one of the older Robins, it's a girl. He says to her, there's nothing on the Joker that I can't fix with my hands. And so I think he meant to kill him, because obviously he breaks his neck. But it doesn't actually kill the Joker. He kills himself. But he drove him to that point, I think. So it's yeah.
And do you think we ever see that again?
Defeat. Say again.
Do you ever think, because obviously that's like a super, as you just said, for the Batman's perspective, he's counting every death, and we see this in all of the video games. When it comes down to the Batman, he's consistently feels responsible for, you know, the deaths of others. Do you think that there's any other sort of film or any other character depiction of the Batman that shows that sort of, I think the word I'm looking for is responsibility for the deaths of others?
Well, I think you could probably look at it as a kind of desperation, because I think he kind of realizes that it's not necessarily that he's failed, but his ultimate mission hasn't actually worked. And I think another portrayal of that is in the Batman v Superman, in Ben Affleck's version of Batman, because obviously he kills people in that film. And the film got quite a bad theatrical release. It wasn't a very good film when it first came out of cinema, but the director's cut is actually brilliant. And it's partly because there's more explanation of the story. I mean, obviously there's an extra half an hour of detail and stuff, but there's more. Excuse me. There's more narrative. There's more dialogue, and some of the things that Alfred says, Jeremy Irons, one of the things he says that sticks with me is that when Batman first sees Superman fighting against Zod in the sky, literally seeing God and the devil fight. But to him, he doesn't see a difference between the two. He only sees the potential for absolute mayhem. And he knows that Superman could destroy the entire planet effectively if he wanted to. And he knows that there would be nothing that humanity could do to stop him, because there's no weapon that can do anything about it. And so part of the feeling he gets from that is desperation, because he feels like he's helpless. And one of the monologues that Alfred has, he says that the feeling of desperation makes good men turn cruel. And they explore that a little bit with you hear sort of stories of at the Daily Planet when Clark is doing his day job. You hear stories of the Batman being really, really brutal to the criminals in Gotham, even to the point of branding them with
The bat.
a
Yeah.
burning bat. And it's like he's stepped it up a level. And it's like he no longer cares if anyone thinks he's good or not. He's just got his mission, and he's going to stop at nothing to achieve it. And so that kind of idea, I think, because he's fully prepared to just kill any criminal, but he's also prepared to kill Superman. And I think it's because he's just feels helpless, and he's just like, well, there is no way to fight this other than killing him. And so I think I trailed off there.
No, I think what you've done there is clarify something really key to the Batman character as well. And you've answered perfectly what that feeling of responsibility. The reason I think, from what you've just said there, to me, I think the reason why Batman becomes cruel is not only his feel of helplessness, but his symbol is fear. That's how he controls the criminals around him. That's how he, takes on armies and of villains. The problem with Superman is that man has nothing to fear, and so Batman's symbol doesn't have an effect. When we get into the series of the Batman, movies by Christopher Nolan, is that's one of the first things we learn about Batman is how does he become the person he is? It's through how does he transfer that ability to have the gangsters actually fear somebody? And it's through symbols. And I think the reason why he becomes more cruel is because he's trying to up that ante, because he knows no other way other than to do it like that. But I think something that I was going to ask as well is that, with that being said, the Batman isn't necessarily cruel from what I've seen in other depictions of him. And so it's really interesting to see Ben Affleck's sort of character. I love Jeremy Irons, by the way, because Jeremy Irons' performance of Alfred is fantastic.
Yeah, brilliant.
Very raw, very rough around the edges. And I felt like the movie got a lot of slack, and I think because it wasn't well refined as a film, they had some fantastic characters. It didn't necessarily have that ability to be a good film overall. Nonetheless, what I would like to see in the future, and what I'm hoping from Robert Pattinson, is to have that raw brutality that he shows in the trailer, and to have that symbol. Like it's really intriguing to see him, for instance, that some things, like you said, like the gadgets, we don't see this in the Nolan films very much. We see, like, Bruce has got the gun, it goes up, and there's that whole scene of, why are you Batman? Why can't I be like you? I've got the, the little pretender, because he's got like the shield on and stuff like that. And I don't think we see enough of those gadgets. Do you have a favorite one? I was going to ask that, actually. Do you have one that comes to mind?
Favorite gadget? I mean, the best one that I can see, apart from the cowl he has in Batman v Superman, because the voice changer and everything is fucking awesome. But it's the Batmobile that he's got. It's just it looks mean, it looks epic, and it's like that's the best one, I think, personally.
Yeah. Did you?
But I like the design of his grapnel gun in the Batman v Superman film as well, because the in Batman Begins, his grapnel gun, it doesn't look like you could actually hold on to it while it was pulling you away. But in the Batman v Superman film, it's got like a little hook here, so you can make sure you hold it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. Yeah, because obviously it's carrying your entire body weight when you're like shooting it up. Yeah. So it's got to be sort of
wearing a glove.
Yes, exactly.
So yeah.
So, with that in mind, I want to ask you this as well, because if the Batmobile is your favorite gadget, did you ever play the last Arkham Knight video game?
Oh yeah.
What did you think of the whole sort of mechanics?
I loved it. I really
blowing stuff up.
Yeah, definitely. I really liked the gliding system in that game as well. I thought being able to fly around and like boost yourself up to like just fly almost virtually half the city. That was brilliant. It's a good game, that. really good at
Yes,
that.
and it
The
showed
whole
that
series
detail
is
that you're
brilliant.
looking for. It did, I was going to ask you about this. Is that there's some seriously good villains in Batman, and I don't think we've had, apart from the Joker, some. I think Tom Hardy did a good representation of Bane, but the real Bane, he's like a friggin' absolute weapon, in
Yeah,
one way or
yeah,
another, isn't he? He's
yeah.
250 pounds of lean muscle, ready to kill anyone in his path. But
Yeah.
do you think? Do you see a villain like Penguin, for instance, who's going to be one of the main focuses in the next Batman? Do you think that'll be interesting to see how he's played out?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Because I think the first time we saw Penguin in live action was I think it's Batman Returns, like 1991, I think, or 1990.
Yeah, the
It
silly
wasn't
one. Yeah.
the silly one. It wasn't very good, and I think it was because it was kind of made to be a bit silly, and it was kind of made to be a bit childish, and it just wasn't. It didn't capture the essence for me, at least. Um, the essence of the story. But the Penguin is a good one because he's kind of like this criminal boss, kind of like this mafia like boss who he basically supplies guns and drugs and stuff. He's not like the typical hard man. Every single time here in Batman fight, he always loses horribly. um, but he's like I don't know how you'd say it really. He's like Walter White in Breaking Bad.
Yes,
He's
he's
not
a
he's not a tough
mastermind,
guy.
isn't he?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, he's a supplier. Yeah,
And that's
yeah,
actually something that I was gonna to add on is that the Penguin in No Man's Land, the audiobook that you recommended, it has this really nice description of how he's almost like a commander. Like
yeah,
there's no physical prowess to him, but he's just a tactical genius in how he's able to understand how to control others and put them out like pieces on a chessboard. And
yeah.
I was going to ask you, do you see that in his character? There's like that level of like ability to move pieces, and Batman's like playing him each time they battle.
Mm. Yeah, something like that, definitely. Obviously not in the Batman Returns,
No.
not in the film. But yeah, the character is definitely described it that way. He's a criminal mastermind,
Yeah.
and very intelligent.
And I think that's what I'm looking for in the villains. It's got to be believable, doesn't it? That's why
Yeah,
when we watch The Killing Joke or Batman Returns or The Dark Knight, there's like that believability in how savage these villains are, because there are no bounds. Chaos is their agent, and it's the ability to show that on screen that I'm looking forward to seeing. But obviously the Penguin's another one. There's so many more out there. Do you have one that you specifically, I gave you an example there. Do you have one that you're like, yes, I want to see them next?
in my opinion, Batman's best villain is actually Bane. He's the best one, I think. The reason is maybe when we get to the Dark Knight Rises, we'll cover this in more detail. But Bane is he basically is Batman. He's every bit as physically capable, and he has all the gadgets and the intelligence and the resources and so on and so forth. The difference is he's willing to kill people.
Yes.
And that's kind of it. That's the only. So it's like with Batman, there's a limit, which is killing, and with Bane, there is no limits, and that's part of the reason he's so good. I think in the when Bane was first introduced in the Nightfall story arc, which came out in like the early '90s, I think he was described as this. He's an orphan who is in prison for a crime that his father committed. And the island, it was a small island nation in like South America somewhere called Santa Prisca. And the prison he was in was called Pena Dura or something, which stands for like hard time or hard ground or something like that. And he had this little cuddly bear, which he kept a knife in. He called it Osito.
Really? I didn't know that. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's fucking cool. And because he was raised in prison, he learned to defend himself at a very young age. So he's a really good fighter. And he also, because he was put in solitary confinement for a long, long time. So he did a lot of meditation, a lot of workouts, and he made himself into this hyper strong, unbreakable will character. And he basically became the king, the alpha of this prison. But every night when he went to sleep, he had this nightmare of a bat flying towards him. So when he heard about the Batman, he thought that was what that was. And he basically thought that Batman was to Gotham what Bane was to his prison. And so he wanted to knock Batman off the top spot. So he breaks out, goes to Gotham, and he basically engages in like guerrilla warfare against Batman for like a year. And if you imagine that Batman's been around for a couple of years at this point, and he's locked up a lot of criminals and saved a lot of people. And Bane basically comes along and just undoes all of his hard work. So Batman, over the course of the year, gets really, really, really tired and really run down. And then they have a fight. And that's when Bane, there's this iconic image of this ridiculously massive looking Bane lifting Batman up and breaking his back. So Bruce is then in a wheelchair after that for a while. But it's a really good story, really, really good story.
I remember that bit that you're talking about there is because Bruce talks about it in like one of his diaries within No Man's Land, where he says that he was so unprepared he would never let that happen again. It was that unpreparedness to fight Bane, because Bane's just prowess is madness. But it's fascinating that you described him to be like they're so similar, and that there's only one line that can be drawn to define the difference between the two of them. Do you think the writers did that deliberately to have a counterpart that reflected that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think the two most iconic villains for me are the Joker and Bane. And I think the Nolan trilogy, they did it in the right order by having the Joker first, and then they had Bane. And part of the reason for that is because I think that in the Dark Knight, the Joker kind of represents complete chaos, right? Whereas Batman stands for complete order.
Yeah.
And Batman's way kind of wins because people have been inspired to be that, to go along with what's good, and not necessarily what's bad, what feels good. Where am I going with this? I had a better trail that I was trying to follow there.
You know what? I was hoping you were going to say something along the lines of that the Bane represents ordered chaos.
Well, it kind of is. It kind of is. It's like if Batman went too far, that's what Bane would kind of represent. And it's certainly, if you imagine that the character of the Batman is a character of Bruce Wayne's psyche, right? And when at the end of the Dark Knight, the character has to leave. So it's just Bruce Wayne for the next 7 years, or whatever. And during that time, the Batman character is obviously still in his mind, and it's kind of developing because it couldn't ever really destroy it. And so what happens eventually is it then comes out again, but it's projected in a way that is uncontrolled, but it has all the discipline of the Batman character. And so it's like this strange mishmash of complete order and complete chaos. And it's like if someone if you imagine Bane is actually kind of like Hitler, right? In a sense, just thinking on the fly here, sorry. Hitler was an enormous fan of discipline, right? And so like he, washed like 4 or 5 times a day or whatever, and he could stand in certain positions for ages, and he would, work, focus, and that's kind of what Bane represents. But what he is aiming at is complete destruction. And it's like if that's what you were aiming at, and you had the discipline, the will, and you had the ability to enact it all, you would need a really strong will, and that's kind of, I've got trailed off there.
Part of that example as well, I'd like to point out that Hitler was also addicted to like cocaine and steroids, so there's a nice link between the two of them. So there's that as well.
Yeah, it's true.
I think that's well. That's Bane's downfall, isn't it? It's his addiction as well as his like thoughts of just the world around him is just purely a hierarchy, and that he would just forever be in control. And I think that Batman's intellect was that after realizing that he was breakable, he could put himself back together. because there are definite points in Batman's journey, I'll put it, because he is a hero, isn't he? He's like the archetypical, sort of what I would class as, and I don't know if you know who he is, but he's almost like Vegeta in one way or another from Dragon Ball Z, in the sense that he's basically a terrible person, but at the same time he's also like a brilliant person.
I wouldn't actually call him a hero. I would actually call him a villain, personally. But that's because he's not a good man. No. He is actually a really, really bad person.
Well, if you saw your parents die in front of you, I don't think you'd be a good person either. So
this is it. So I actually have some thoughts on that. If we were to just skip away from Bane for
no, chuck in. Yeah.
So if you imagine that, psychologically speaking, your parents kind of give you values in your life, and as your brain physically grows, you experience what I'm trying to say. You psychologically develop around the values you are given, and that's in the environment you have. And so the environment you have, you are a reflection of your environment.
Yes, you're a sponge. You soak up all of the information.
Yes, exactly. And the sponge forms itself based on what information it gets.
Yes.
Bruce Wayne, his parents died before he could get anything from them, and so he didn't actually have an ideal in a sense. And so it's almost like when Bruce was 7 or 8 years old, God effectively died and left the universe, right? And so the little boy, the psyche, was on its own, and it had no up or down, no light or dark. And it's obviously a Nietzschean ideal. It's something Jordan Peterson might say, is that when your ideal is dead, you are in hell, and there's no. You're at least in hell until you form your own ideal.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I had some notes. It might sound a little bit dry without some speech. So maybe
no, bring it on, man. I want to hear about and something I want to add there is that Batman, because he doesn't have an ideal, but he surrounds himself consistently with the complete opposite, the hell, on a regular basis. You know what I mean? Like, if you don't have an ideal and you just consistently see hell on a regular basis, you're going to drive yourself a little bit insane because you don't have that ability to understand the other side. So I was intrigued to see if your notes say that at all, if there's that,
Yeah, it was certainly a get there. There was one thing I can't remember though, if it's in if it's in the No Man's Land audiobook, or if it's another one I read. But Bruce, he has this monologue in his head, and he does effectively recognise that if he hadn't have been a billionaire and had all the economic resources that anyone could ever hope for, that when his parents died, he would have quite easily just become another criminal. Obviously, when Joe Chill is the murderer,
yes,
he knows that he could have easily become that. It's just that the circumstances he was born into, which the billions of dollars and his trust fund, it was because of that he didn't turn into something else. I forgot where I'm going. I'll just stop. Do you get what I mean there?
I do, and I think that it's hard not to argue with, because obviously you don't want to say that money makes the world go round, but in some way or another, the higher, I think the statistic is that the better your surroundings, whether they be financial or sort of environmental in the positive manner of like parents and who you're surrounded by, the more likely you are to be successful. And I think that's sort of supported by, the top 10 wealthiest people on earth being, surrounded by loving people who've raised them to a point to become better people, which can be backed by, Bill Gates and all of these top 500. So I think Bruce Wayne as well, the fact that he had that and that he had Alfred, who he does say, even though he never admits that he's his father, he is a figure to look to for advice in some way or another. So do you think that Alfred is, although he's not an ideal, do you think he keeps him within does he have an effect in keeping him on the right track?
Yeah, I think so. I think like I say, he keeps him on the right track. He kind of keeps him grounded in a sense. And there's also the fact that Bruce never has to become desperate.
Yes.
Because desperation does drive a lot of crimes, and obviously he does say this in Batman Begins, I think, where he loses certain assumptions about the simple right and wrong of good and bad or criminal behavior and stuff. And so he steals so that he doesn't starve.
Yes.
And, there's that Aladdin moment where he's eating a bit of fruit and then gives it to the kid. And so I think he starts to understand just how lucky he was. But at the same time, he is still psychologically lost.
Yes.
It's
also, that's linked really well. And we're going to cover this in Batman Begins anyway. But when the gang boss, I forgot his name, I think it began with an F.
Carmine Falcone.
Falcone, thank you. He says, you'd have to go 1,000 miles for anyone not to know your name. That right there, although Falcone didn't mean to unlock Bruce's mind, but he did in some way or another. And I think what you're describing there, that idea that if he hadn't had it and it, he immediately starts to realize that, because he's like, damn, he gives his coat to that man on the corner. He starts to realize that the surroundings he's had up till now, they've sheltered him from the world a little bit, in the sense of somewhere or another, which, like you said, is a good thing. But does the wealth also build arrogance within Bruce in some way or another?
Well, he plays the part that it does, because like you say, like I said before, he does in the comics. Certainly, he plays the part of the billionaire playboy. He drinks, I think it's ginger beer in bottles, and he's sort of carrying ginger beer around with him all the time, and so it looks like he's constantly drinking. And obviously it's kind of, the idea is to push away suspicion that he's the Batman.
Yes.
But he has to kind of live up to this, not necessarily idiot, but he's live up to the idea of being a trust fund baby. It's just like no responsibility, they're just carefree. Nothing really matters. I'll just pay for it. It's like that. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I saw that in Bruce. Obviously Bruce isn't the real person. Bruce is merely a mask that, there is no Bruce Wayne. There is only Batman in my mind. I don't know if you agree with that at all, but to me,
I know what you mean. Yeah.
It's
like Bruce. Go on.
To me, it's Batman was created the night his parents died. In somewhere or another, he saw the world taken from him. Like you said, his ideals are gone. And although Batman isn't a hero, I don't necessarily want to classify him as a villain either, because he does have some redeeming traits, in the sense that he has this unbelievable sort of justification to save people and wanting to help others. But I wanted to know as well from you, is that, does that split personality sort of represent the reason why he isn't that hero, that inability to just be that one person?
Yes, I think it's because he is broken and he cannot be put back together. Yeah, there is he can't find a way to integrate. In Jungian ideas, the perfect life is one where everything is integrated properly, so everything is working towards the same goal. And so that would mean like your biology, your desires, your social situation, and so on and so forth. All of it is cohesive, right? And it all works, and it tries to travel in the same direction. But Batman is in a lot of ways counterintuitive to the life that Bruce Wayne would want to live. And that would be the kind of carefree, billionaire playboy, trust fund baby, so on and so forth.
Yes.
So yeah, he is broken completely, but he knows that as well. And so one of the things he does when he takes the boy wonder, Robin, when he takes them on as his sort of apprentice, he does try to fix them because he knows the feeling that Dick Grayson went through because his parents were killed, and he didn't want him to break completely. But it did kind of happen. But Dick was actually able to live a relatively normal life, despite the fact that he also became Nightwing.
I was going to ask you about that actually as well, because Nightwing to me, it represents what Bruce could have been if he hadn't let Batman be totally there altogether. And you've put that perfectly together. I don't need to put any more on that. So do you think that although they're not his kids, that, he adopts a lot of people who resemble who he is? He sees like the broken pieces and he wants to put them back together. Do you think that the broken try to fix, and that sort of like resembles that to in Batman, is that he's a fixer? He has to try and put the pieces back together.
Yeah, I would say that. There is. Do you remember that book, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover?
Yes, love it.
The writer of that book, Robert Moore. Robert Moore or Robert Greene?
Yeah, Robert Moore. Yep.
Robert Moore. I'm pretty certain it's him that says only the wounded healer heals. And there's a lot of ideas that a lot of the people who become psychologists and become whatever it is, in attempt to try and fix people, there's something in them that's broken. Yes. And so in Jungian terms, they are trying to fix themselves by fixing the world outside. But they never can, because they can never identify fully what it is inside them that is actually broken. So yeah, but through them, people. I'm
going to add to that. Perfect. How do you think Batman could have fixed himself?
Well, tricky one.
Because it's easy for us to sit here and just move around it. But I think that's the thing that I'm looking at the moment, is that, what
I think if he had posited an ideal and then not been able to become it, that might have fixed him. But the fact that he was actually able to become Batman, I think that meant that his ideal is like, it wasn't high enough or something. It wasn't transcendent enough. It wasn't unreachable enough for him. And because he was actually able to ascend, in his psychologically speaking, to the level of what he was thinking, he couldn't go any further, because anytime he detracted from it, he would punish himself, because he could actually get back there. If that makes sense.
100%. And so I'm gonna take you from there as well. That, to me, perfectly sort of links onto the fact that Batman consistently believes that he can sort of hold Gotham on his own. He can do things on his own. He's Batman. And that, to me, is ego. And so do you think that Batman in itself, he's reached this level, and it almost, he believes he's, I don't want to say a god, but there's a level of demigod in the ability to be able to control a city like that. And so do you think that Batman reached that level, and because he reached that level and he has no higher sort of ability to go up, it's like that level of ego and arrogance is created because of that, and how he treats sort of his subordinates and other heroes that he encounters throughout the story?
It very well could be. I'm not sure I can fully answer that, to be honest, but it does kind of lead me to the notes I've made. But I can see what you mean by that. That he does become very arrogant. He's also very stubborn.
Yes.
That
can be easily mixed up, can't it, as well?
Exactly. Yeah. And there's almost no limit. It's obviously fantasy, and so obviously impossible things happen. But he does seem to be able to handle pretty much everything that's ever thrown at him. There was one comic book I read a couple of years ago where him and Jim Gordon were on the roof of the GCPD, and they were just talking, and then they look up because they hear an explosion, and there's a plane that's about to crash into, I think, just into the river, in Gotham River. And Jim's looking up and he sees it happening, and he turns around and Batman is already gone. And within 2 pages, Batman just says over the radio, "Jim, I'm on the plane." And
Typical Batman.
and Jim is just like, you're what? Okay, of course you are. And he's literally like on the plane, on the wing of the plane on the outside, and he's I think he uses grapple gun to try and lift one of the what do you call it, the rudders to try and steer the better. So that was quite funny, and it's like
that's
there's
amazing.
nothing, there's seemingly nothing he can ever overcome. Yeah, I just thought that was brilliant. That one.
That's
that
a fantastic example, mate. So good. And I love that that's a consistent theme between the relationship between Jim Gordon and Batman, is that, you know, Batman's like a shadow. He just sort of disappears and reappears. And I've seen this throughout the movies, and I don't know about you and the animations, and that he just sneaks up behind Jim Gordon and just says, "I am here," and he's out of nowhere. It's like, "Oh, Batman, you're here." Just I love that about him, and he has that ability to disappear and reappear, which it's sort of shown in the movies or in some way or another, and you know, in the sense that, you know, I think Christian Bale does a good, you know, they show a good job of him disappearing and reappearing. But the detective part is something that I've not seen properly portrayed personally. I was going to ask you about that, because that's a key aspect of Batman for me in the games, in the animated series. What do you think would have to be done in movies to sort of portray that properly?
I think it would be something like solving a series of murders, you know, something like that, where he's looking at real evidence. And I would imagine that something, if you could take inspiration from another film like The Bone Collector, or like one of the Alex Cross films, or one of the Sherlock Holmes films, I think you could probably piece together a good storyline. So maybe that's what we'll see with the Batman that comes out next year. But Ben Affleck's character was quite good, I thought, because he, you know, he's doing this research with his, you know, supercomputer, because he found the kryptonite, and you know, he did his investigation.
Yes. Because there's only so far you can go, isn't there, with the investigation?
Yeah, exactly. And obviously he, you know, hacked into Lex Luthor's servers at his home and stuff like that. So it would have been difficult, I think, to show it in that film because of all the other stuff that was going on. But this next one, because the enemy, I believe, is the Riddler. Obviously, the Riddler's going to be leaving clues and stuff because he wants to kind of, you know, as an artist, he wants to be seen to be better. So excuse me, I am hoping that there is a Holmesian kind of plot running through, you know, where he either solves clues, or like Sherlock, he perceives things that other people can't, because that is one of the things you see in a lot of the other animated comics and stuff. There's one episode of I forget which series it is. It might be like Batman Brave and the Bold or something. It's like one of the much more childish ones. But he comes across Sherlock Holmes.
Really?
The actual fictional character Sherlock Holmes. And Sherlock, he sort of walks around him, and sort of, you know, analyzes him. So he basically deduces that he's a billionaire playboy of sorts. And Bruce just says Sherlock Holmes, I presume. And it's kind of like it's like a Holmesian kind of deduction that I would love to see in the new film.
I totally agree. And I think that meticulous ability to pick out points on somebody, I'd love to see that, in the sense that the Riddler has like a picture with a splatter of blood, and he looks at the picture and it's like that blood pattern means something that takes him to like Bloodhaven or something. I don't know, you know, just chucking stuff out there. Obviously, there's only so much you can do in one film, but like you said, it would be fantastic. Maybe even a mini series. We take a Batman character and maybe they'll do that, because I think that there's definitely some money to be made, as clearly shown by Netflix, Disney, and everyone else at the moment.
Absolutely.
To have a fantastic series. You know, if Robert Pattinson wants to do it, you know, he's got himself set up for a while if he did that. Financially, that wouldn't be an issue, and I think it would be a great way to get fans who are into Batman like us to see a more expanded universe that isn't like, I don't want to, crap on Gotham, the TV series at all.
No,
but
crap all over it, mate. I couldn't stand it. I could not stand it.
I mean, in fewer words, Ollie's put exactly how I feel about it as well. But it's just one of those things where stuff goes sideways. Oh God. We'll be hearing from WB lawyers anytime soon now. Anyway, yes. So it would be nice to see a series that gives justice to the Batman universe and does it justice and does it.
And because you could take the example of Game of Thrones for just throw the spotlight on it. You had 8 seasons of a incredibly long-running narrative that it didn't tie itself together very well because they ran out of source material. But with the Batman, you have 80 years of comic book history and lore and mythology and stuff. And so you could do, you could conceivably do, it wouldn't need to be 20 episodes long. You could conceivably do 8 episodes per season. And that would satisfy a lot of Batman fans if you could capture the essence of the character properly and of the story properly. You could do it, and I think it's brilliant because you can, with long-running narratives, you can get into such detail, and you can explore individual characters so much more than you can with a 1.5 hour or a 2-hour film.
Totally
and certainly over multiple seasons, because obviously they did this very well with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where a lot of the characters went through a lot of different changes, and you have this one character who basically never changes throughout the whole story, and that would be Steve Rogers in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But that could also be Batman in the Batman. I don't know what they could call it. They call it the Batman Files or something like that. And they could be like
that would be sick. I'd love that.
Yeah,
that'd be so good.
And you could have all of the. They've obviously proven that it works with Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Punisher. Not the other two because they weren't very good, in my opinion. But also WandaVision, which I've not seen yet, but I've heard is really good.
You're in for a treat, bud. You're in for a treat.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yes.
So yeah, I think that film, as your typical medium of telling a story, I think it's kind of on its way out. It's not this ever going to die, because it never would die, because it is nice to just sit down and watch a single story that is encapsulated in 1-2 hour slot.
Yes. But
for people like me, I really like the character of Batman, but there isn't enough. There isn't enough of it. Like, I can't get enough, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Other than just to rewatch all of the films over and over again.
Yes.
So that would get really boring really quickly.
It does, yeah.
And I also don't want to ruin it for myself.
Yes.
But if there's a long-running TV series, 5 seasons, 8 episodes each, hour long, that had, I won't belabor the point, but you get the idea. It would be.
I would love that. I think.
And then they could do the same with Superman and Flash and Wonder Woman and then tie it all together with the Justice League.
They have proven that with the Flash and Green Arrow. Green Arrow and Flash did get a lot of traction when they created it originally. So there is that. My first thought, as soon as you said series, I thought for the Joker we have Mark Hamill's voice, and then we have a stunt double who just plays for the role. Like that mad cackle. You just can't reproduce it. It's just so good.
It's fantastic, isn't it? I wonder which actor could actually play the Joker. I mean, Joaquin Phoenix did a good job.
He's just too expensive. Let's be honest. He's just so expensive. It would just be crazy.
Yeah. I would like him actually to be the Joker, because I kind of figured out a way that that film could fit into the DC universe.
It can, yeah.
Because there's I think it's in the Killing Joke. The Joker says, "If I have a past, I prefer it to be multiple choice or something." And it's like he just imagines fantasies and stuff. And it would be cool if that film was, because at the end of the film, he was in Arkham Asylum, wasn't he?
He was.
And so it'd be cool if he was actually in Arkham Asylum for the entirety of that film, and he was just imagining his, a backstory that didn't exist, and he just played it all out in his mind, and he became this wonderful hero that everybody loved.
That plays in so well to the Joker's character as well, doesn't it?
It would, yeah.
He just loves an audience. He wants people to adore him and see his maniacal ways of joking and playing this performance. It's so good. I loved it. And that's what I was going to ask you. Because obviously for me, my favorite Batman voice would be from the video games, from all of the Arkham games, because it's like that proper deep. Yeah, thank you. And then Mark Hamill's voice for the Joker. But like you say, it would have to be probably for me, because the griminess and the down to earthness of Arthur Flick, Joaquin Phoenix just has that ability to perform. Do you have people who you're immediately like, you've said Joaquin Phoenix. I don't know how you can pronounce that properly. Joaquin, thank you.
I think that's how
terrible.
It's pronounced anyway. But...
Can't run a podcast nowadays without sounding like an idiot. Anyway, So, who would you have, apart from Robert Pattinson, who's obviously going to be up and coming? Who would you have playing Batman?
I would really like to see Ben Affleck play Batman again. I thought he was the best on-screen Batman had. The trouble with the character is that you need someone who is larger than life. And by that, I mean someone who is actually physically massive. It would kind of have to look like a bodybuilder. And Ben Affleck, he looks fucking good. And I think he's 6'3" or something, so he's very tall anyway. And he's also got to have a chin, because you need the cowl, obviously. It's got to, he's got to have like a Judge Dredd kind of
dude,
chin.
My immediate thought was the guy who played Éomer from Lord of the Rings.
Carl Urban.
Carl Urban. Oh, mate, just have the chin and everything. Just his Judge Dredd voice.
He would be good. Yeah, he would be good, and he'd certainly have the look of Bruce Wayne as well, because he's symmetrical, and I don't know how tall he is, but I don't think he looks like a bodybuilder though. I've not seen him with his shirt off or anything. So I'm not sure,
recently, he's gotten bigger for the role of that superhero killing series. I think he played Billy the Butcher.
That's it, yeah.
And he, I can imagine him just getting jacked and just getting that width. That would be fascinating to see him playing that as well. So those are two really cool calls. Ben Affleck, as much as I'd love to see him again, I don't think that he would take it up just based off getting criticised. I mean, there's only so much somebody can take, from the media.
It's a shame, really, because it was, in my opinion, it was a brilliant film, but only the director's cut, the theatrical version wasn't very good.
But based on that,
I don't know who else would be. It would also. There's a joke in Deadpool 2 where he says the characters that he's looking for, they have to be young enough to carry the franchise for 10 to 12 years, and so you would need someone who is like 30 years old.
Yes.
They'd need to have a bit of maturity. But they'd also need to be young enough that they can do it until they're 45, so that it can be every year.
Is that a joke on Wolverine by chance?
Well, he fucking lasted well. He was 28.
Hugh Jackman's steroid cycle must have been freaking crazy to get that ripped in the Wolverine. Just friggin' madness. Whatever he did, someone else needs to do for the Batman.
Definitely. But and why wouldn't you? Like, if you're in Hollywood, you're playing, a larger than life character anyway, and you're getting millions of dollars. You've probably got the best doctors, the best nutrition. Just fucking take a load of steroids, mate. Just do it.
Well, you can look at, I don't know if you've been keeping up at the moment, but Chris Hemsworth, for his next role, I think he's playing Hulk Hogan. So he's having to get massive at the moment. And you can just tell the trend is just jumping through his system, just fucking crazing up, because he just looks huge. Anyway, off topic there, but that was a great, sort of dissection of the different characters there. And I was going to ask as well, based on the future of how the Batman, because we went from having nothing back in the early 2000s. I remember watching this on TV and watching, looking at Batman, thinking such a cool character. Do you feel that it's been a bit oversaturated, over the years, as much as we love it?
I think the Tim Burton films, as good as they were, as entertaining as they were, I think they damaged the idea of Batman. Because it made everything silly. Yeah. It just kind of certainly made Bane in, I forget which film it was, Dark Knight, Batman Forever or something.
Yeah.
It basically made Iceman, the Riddler, and Bane. It kind of made them offshoots of the Joker's personality, and it kind of made them all the same villain, really. And they weren't. They're all very different in the comics.
Yes.
The Victor Freeze, he's not like a gangster like he was in Batman Forever. He's a scientist. He's trying to cure his wife's condition. Bane, like I said, he's this genius that was born in hell, literally born in hell, and rose out of it. And the Riddler is like this narcissistic, insecure genius who just wants to prove his intellect is greater than Batman's.
Yes.
And don't get me wrong, Jim Carrey played him very well. But I think that it would be better to look at that character as actually being the Joker and not the Riddler.
Yes.
Because the Riddler doesn't do all the maniacal laughing.
So. He does. He's more of a puzzle person. Like you said, I love the sort of intellectual superiority complex that he clearly has. And in the Batman games, he makes these huge, like, sort of puzzles for Batman to figure out, to be able to basically capture him. And it's always got TVs. So he's always got somebody watching. And as you said earlier, he has to be in front of an audience. And it is kind of similar to the Joker, but the Joker doesn't really, the irony with the Joker would be that the TV was turned off the entire time. You know what I mean? Like, in the sense that with the Riddler, he has to have somebody watching, but the Joker wouldn't really realize what he's doing. As said in The Dark Knight, he's a dog chasing his tail. He wouldn't know what to do with it if he caught it, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I would love to see the Riddler in a proper sort of battle of wits with the Batman. We've seen so much action over the years with the Batman. What do you think that would look like on screen if you saw it?
Well, I'm hoping it would look like some kind of Sherlock versus Moriarty kind of display.
Oh, yeah.
I think that would be a good way of looking at it. Like BBC Sherlock, Benedict Cumberbatch. Actually, Benedict Cumberbatch would probably be very good. He'd be a very good villain. I wonder maybe Joker. But anyway, that's besides the point. But Sherlock versus Moriarty was another battle of intellect, and I think that would be a good way to look at it.
Visioning all the scenarios of what could happen. Yeah. Exactly. That's really good.
Batman does do that. There's a joke that Dick Grayson gets like blown up and thrown out of a building or something, and in his inner monologue, he says that Batman would have already thought of 30 different plan A's, A, B, C, D, all the way to Z. And he would have already started on it, and he would have already made a gadget that could solve this problem. And Dick Grayson was just lying there in pain. And it was like Batman, he never switches off. Like, no. He's always going. You know what I mean?
Based on that, and I totally think so, because this is the funny thing about Dick Grayson, is that there's a level of humanity that he brings to the arc when it comes down to listening to him talk. It's almost as if like he brings that sort of humor to realize that we're all dressed up in bat suits right now, guys. Like he sort of makes everyone realize like we're full grown adults dressed all up in black, and he talks about the cowls and the funny stuff behind it.
Yeah, it's like we're on our way to a Halloween party, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. and so I was going to say as well with I think within we said a minute ago with Batman's sort of, I forgot, we were saying about Batman The joke. Oh, I forgot what I was going to say there. Lost train of thought. Damn.
We were talking about the intellect.
That
The
was it.
Riddler.
The different scenarios. Um, Within the different scenarios, something that I saw as a fun fact, and I don't know if you saw it recently, is that the Batman has like a certain sleeping pattern that he does in order to be able to fight crime all night. Did you
Okay.
ever see this?
I've often Googled like when does Batman sleep. The assumption is that he has some kind of Uberman schedule, which is where you get like 10 minutes every 3 hours or something. But I don't know how it would actually work. But obviously it is fantasy, so we have to just kind of accept.
Obviously, that I was just intrigued because, like, he fights during the night and then he just gets beaten up all day. And within all of these sort of books and TV series, he does get stabbed and he does get injured, and it's like, how do you, in order to recover, as it's clearly fantasy, but at the same time, there's that level of realism to the Batman. You know what I mean? Like the
Definitely. I was thinking about this a little while ago, because the character has an eidetic memory, and so that's perfect recall. Effectively, he doesn't forget anything. And I often wonder if I was to go and live in Tibet for 2 years and do nothing other than meditate, what would actually happen to my brain when I came back, or in that process, what would happen? How would it change? And could I make it so that I had an eidetic memory? And I think that part of the character's backstory is that he spent time, he was away from Gotham for like 10 years or something, like traveled the world and learned his craft. And obviously there's going to be the certain genetic traits and innate ability of, innate intelligence stuff. But I do often wonder if you can, I don't know, increase your IQ to however high, and increase your memory and your verbal fluency, and this and that and the other, and your imagination by meditating for long enough consistently. Because there's several studies been done on meditation, and one of them is that it reduces inflammation, and that can aid healing. So I do often wonder, like, if you just spent long enough meditating, could you actually make yourself heal like quicker than you would normally?
I do see.
Obviously, again, it is fantasy, but
I see a comparison in my mind because I follow Shaolin monks who are based in Germany, who do a lot of meditation, but they also combine it like Batman in the sense that it's to do with, like, they do a lot of fighting, so they do kung fu and meditation, and then they like have a fully sustainable life where they don't really need to buy or sell stuff. They just like survive off that. And there is like a level of, you do look at that and think to yourself, like, is that how Batman, because they're warriors in their own right and they're real, like they're the representation in my mind in real life of what, what Batman's whole beginning was, in the sense that he was a monk who was a warrior and he learned how to control his body and his mind. And I do like that relationship between the two of them. Do you think that you personally, if you had that time, would you ever sacrifice that time to go away and stay with those people, maybe even for a couple of weeks or whatever?
I've often thought that in my my time off from my work, that I would go to Bhutan or to Tibet or something, and just spend a month in a monastery, just meditating, just doing whatever, just living the simplest life you possibly could. Partly just to see what it was like, but also to see what, to experience whatever changes you might have, personality changes and whatever else, through like near constant meditation. In the times that I've traveled recently and I've had to be in quarantine the first time I was in quarantine, it was 25 days in a hotel room, and then recently it was 2 weeks in a hotel room. I was thinking before I went in that I would just meditate, and I'd do like 8 hours a day meditation. And then when I got there, I just watched TV pretty much the whole time. So I think if you were in a situation where it kind of called for it, I probably would be happy to. But when there's other things to do, when the distractions of modern day life, the distractions seem to be nicer almost.
Do you think that the reason why, and obviously we're crossing the boundary between realism and fantasy here in the sense of reality, but do you think the reason why Batman is able to remove the exterior, sort of the external life stuff, is because he never had a normal life in the first place?
Yes, definitely. I think it's because he had to construct his own psyche from the ground up in a sense, but because he was so damaged from his parents' death, it was kind of wrong from the start. And so from the ground up, it was like the foundations were missing almost. And so he had to hold it all together um, through sheer will and discipline. And I would imagine that the meditation probably helped with that.
Mm.
I don't know. I don't know if that actually answered the question or not. I may have had a.
I'm thinking to myself that's the right way of going about it. I think what I wanted to know further is like Bruce was never normal to begin with. You said that, and do you think, based off the archetypes that we know, the warrior, the magician, the lover from Robert Moore's, I look at Bruce and I see that clearly the lover is broken from the beginning immediately, and I see him solely based off the warrior and the magician. And I think, from my mind, do you see him ever becoming the king?
In a kind of a pseudo Shadow King kind of sense, I would say yes, because he is one of the founding members of Justice League. But obviously the Justice League is as a collection of archetypes in itself. It's completed by the other people filling the gaps. But on his own, I don't know. I mean, he's certainly king of his own castle.
Yes.
He is the ruler of his own kingdom, and what he set out to do, he does do it. And so in that sense, he does kind of fulfill the role. One of the defining principles of a good king, though, is making the conceptual ground that is being inhabited by the citizen, is making it fertile for future growth. And I'm not sure he does that. However, in the comics, Bruce Wayne does do a lot of charity work, and he does try to redevelop the city of Gotham. And so it could be the idea that maybe Batman himself can't do it, but Batman and Bruce Wayne as one can fulfill the role. So yeah, maybe because Bruce Wayne is a lover.
Yes, I think that's a perfect answer, because in the films, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but we see that by the end of the third film, and we see the sacrifice that he has to make in order to make the soil fertile, as you put it, in the sense of Gotham in this sense. So based off what we've talked about so far, we've talked about quite a few characteristics around the Batman, and we've talked about the villains, and we've talked around the environment. We haven't talked a lot about Gotham in itself. Do you think that Gotham's environment spawns this, or do you think it's the villains that spawn Gotham to become the place it becomes?
Well, so Ra's al Ghul in Batman Begins says that when a society has reached the pinnacle of its decadence, we return to restore the balance. And there is this idea in the comic books that Gotham is kind of America's greatest city. But it's this, super wealthy, at the forefront of modern technology, but it's held back in a sense by all the crime and corruption.
Yes.
And so it's probably twofold. It's probably one. Actually, just to take a step back a little.
Yeah, go for it.
If you imagine the city of Gotham is kind of like the landscape, the conceptual land, because obviously we're talking about fantasy here. It's the conceptual landscape of Bruce Wayne's psyche, or the psyche of someone in the character, possibly Jim Gordon, but we'll just gloss over that for a second.
Yeah.
The city itself, it's solid, made of stone, gothic. It's got all these dragons and gargoyles everywhere, and like these statues of old people in times gone by. And it's kind of like, if you imagine modern day mythology, is Batman is modern day mythology, and so it's kind of like an updated version of the older stories of the gods and monsters, but with the more evolved, more sophisticated psyche of a human being.
Mm.
Hopefully you can follow that. I don't know if that was, but if you imagine the city represents the modern man's psyche, right? And so it's like access to resources, but also access to all of the bad stuff that feels really good. So there's crime, there's drugs, there's sex, there's rock and roll everywhere.
Yeah.
But the city itself made of stone, right? So if you imagine that in our evolutionary history, we've gone through stages of having to battle certain things within our psychology. Those things that we battled and not necessarily defeated, but made a part of ourselves, integrated with our forward direction. They've become set in stone. So they're now part of the structure of the city. And so you see dragons, things like that. If you imagine this is the Jordan Peterson idea, that the dragon, a mythological dragon, is an amalgamation of all the natural predators that humans might have faced, even before we were humans. So that would have been things like big cats, claws, teeth, eyes, snakes, reptiles, possibly reptilian birds. So you imagine a dragon is kind of all of those things mashed together.
Yeah.
But they're no longer a threat to us. But they're still there. But they're just kind of set in stone. That we can see them, but we don't pay any attention to them because there's many anymore. And then you have like gargoyles, which are, to me anyway, gargoyles, they kind of look like demonic figures.
Yeah.
And so if you imagine, like, if a dragon is the amalgamation of all natural predators, what would a demonic figure look like? And so you can imagine, what would that actually be? What amalgamation of characteristics is a demon? And to me, I would imagine it would be something along the lines of all of the evil and psychopathic tendencies that human beings can exert towards each other. So you have psychopathic smiles and predatory eyes, and people committing evil things to each other, and they're almost set in stone as well. But obviously, the characters that inhabit the city of Gotham, they also exhibit those traits. So it's almost like we haven't evolved past all of those things yet. So they're not quite set in stone. So we can't ignore it. Am I making sense?
Yeah. So let me recap. In my mind, from what I've heard there, is that the idea of the city itself is a conceptual representation of the sort of predators that are around the people, and these sort of, well, it's kind of funny that Batman sort of uses gargoyles as a way to get from rooftop to rooftop, because they're the demonic representations of the thing that he's fighting. So could you sort of like develop on that a little bit? Is that if the dragon hoards the gold in the scenario that Jordan Peterson sort of, what is the gold and what is the dragon in the sort of like representation of Gotham?
Well, so I'm not sure if I could actually identify the gold that a demon might hold, but maybe the gold that a demon might be hiding would be something like the recognition of that character in you. Maybe that, so it's like a conceptual kind of gold.
Yes.
In a sense.
And so in the case of Bruce Wayne, his conceptual goal is to vanquish the what you class as the drugs, the sex, the rock, and well, not the drugs, the sex, and the rock, but the darkness from Gotham.
Yeah.
Because that's like the empty hole that's within him, created by the loss of his parents.
Well, the loss of his parents created the lack of an ideal, I think. So that's why he. If you imagine a character like Superman, this is a better way to describe it, I think. A character like Superman or Captain America, they have very Christian-like values. They're very good men naturally, and they don't really seem to struggle with being good men. It's not like it's a battle for them.
Yeah.
Like, despite the fact that Clark is, could literally tear apart the planet if he wanted to, he has absolutely no innate desire to do that. In all the times that he's ever done bad things, it's usually because he's been controlled by magic or by mind control or something.
Yeah.
And this is the same in Captain America in Marvel Comics. Whenever he's done that, it's always been like he got hypnotized by Hydra or something. He went the wrong way. So from just taking aside from that, the Winter Soldier is kind of like Captain America's shadow of
Yes.
the But just imagine that those two, they don't have any problem being good men.
No.
I think it's because they have high ideals. And it's like they have, because Captain America is a Christian, I believe. And so he has this idea of God. And so he never identifies himself as being God. And Superman, he says it a few times that he's bulletproof. And so for him to be, to walk into gunfire, like it's nothing. But for mortal men to do that, it's quite something because they can actually die from it. And so he's very enamored by the human race and so on and so forth. But with Batman, he, in my mind, he's closer to the idea of the Nietzschean overman, the Superman, which is this character that has cast off the remnants of what you might imagine to be good and evil.
Okay.
And he's created his own ideal. Sorry. Let me rephrase that. That was rubbish. Culturally speaking, we have ideas, we have moral values, right, which are passed down from generation to generation. Batman has cast those off because they're typically transferred to us through religious ideas and stuff, and through fantasy and mythology. And they're given to us by our parents and the environment we grew up in. Batman didn't get that. Bruce Wayne didn't get that. So he had to create his own. And he decided that effectively anything he does that isn't murder is when it's in the pursuit of the good, it is in fact good. So the means justify the ends, or the ends justify the means. That's what it's
Yes.
So he is totally willing to break someone's leg, to put them in a wheelchair, to fracture their eye socket, to knock a few teeth out. He's totally willing to do that, and he's willing to traumatize them, to throw them into Arkham Asylum and lock them away forever.
And it's that lack of morality that you're talking about there, because that's sort of instilled normally within a Christian belief, the idea, exactly. Love thy neighbor.
Exactly. Yeah. And so Batman, in my mind, he is kind of the mythological ideal of the Superman, the overman that Nietzsche spoke about, and thus spoke Zarathustra. And so it's almost like the character came out of the idea of the death of God, and the original creator, Bob Kane, I think it was. There was obviously something in his mind, in his imagination, that gave him this non-Christian hero, right? And it's a non-godlike hero. It's just this vigilante who goes around beating people up, effectively. But he's aiming at the right thing. He's trying to help the city and such forth. So you can think of him as a good man. Batman, though, he doesn't think of himself as a good man. He knows deep down he's a bad person. And there's a line in the graphic novel Hush, which is very good. If you haven't read it, I would recommend it.
I'll have a look.
Basically, Superman is chasing Batman, and he's being mind controlled, and he's going to kill him. And Batman's inner monologue is that if Clark wanted me dead, I'd be dead straight away, because he would just use laser vision or his super speed and just tear me to pieces, and that'd be that. The fact that I'm able to get away is evidence enough. It's because I know Clark. I won't try and say it verbatim because that's pointless, obviously. But he basically says, deep down, Clark is a good person, and deep down, I'm not. And it's at that moment he pulls out a knuckle duster which has kryptonite on it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's sick.
I was wondering where that point was going then, and I was like, Jesus, my God.
And it's like, because he's totally willing to use Superman's weakness, his greatest weakness, against him. And it's like, yeah, he knows full well he is not a good man. The only thing is people think he's good because he aims at what he might be good. Something like that. I'm not sure I really got the point across there.
You did, mate. You did, and I think I'm going to expand on that. Just nice way to end the podcast here. Based off Batman not being not, I think that he doesn't believe that he's a good man, and we're aware he's not the perfect hero. But based off the line that's used by Christopher Nolan, do you think he's the hero that Gotham deserves?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because Gotham is corrupt beyond belief. So yeah, it is.
Yeah. And
Absolutely.
because it's
Absolutely.
technical, you said it was technologically advanced. It's a conceptual representation of the people around it and their goals and their demons, and as well as the dragon that is. And we can't identify the gold. And I'm really glad you said that, because I don't think there is anything to be found until Batman is born, because it's so corrupt. There's not The gold is so well hidden because of all of these demons that it's like something that you've got to scratch away at the surface to be able to find. And although that Bruce is, he doesn't believe he's a good man, and although Batman is not the perfect hero, I think that his belief that he can save Gotham, and as you said, his aim to be a good person is the reason why he could be a hero. Do you think that, we see him forever trying to save Gotham? Do you think that's his saving grace, basically?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, he's kind of a tragic hero because he won't ever actually fully save Gotham. And part of the reason for that is that if he ever did, the one thing left in it that would be corrupt and not following the law and so on and so forth would be him. So then he'd have to just like get rid of himself. So yeah, does that answer the question?
It does. That's such a cool way to end the podcast, because he himself is blocking himself from saving the thing that he wants to save. Oh, that's a brilliant. That's going to lead so well into the series. We're going to be taking it a little bit slower, because what we've done there is broken down a lot more things than we've been able to before in a shorter amount of time. But we're going to be able to tackle a lot more in these shorter spaces. And as Ollie has pointed out, by saying that TV series tackle a lot more detail in characters like the Batman, we're going to try and do that with the podcast by breaking these sections down and giving ourselves enough time to be able to tackle these things in depth.
So. Yeah, 3 hours is a bit long to talk about Lord of the Rings, isn't it? Even though they're fantastic stories, but it got a bit long, didn't it?
Yes, but we're going to do a better job. I'm going to do a better job. And I think you've just summed up a great way for us to start the series and start the Batman trilogy. And I'll be honest, mate, I'm looking forward to just talking about, everything else that comes with it, and continue your knowledge and continue me learning about some of the stuff that I haven't seen from the Batman there. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, mate. Thanks for having me on.
Legendary. We continue this journey together down the traversing underworld. And as always, thank you, Ollie. And this has been a Taylor's Tales podcast. This has been Chris's Corner. I've been your host, Chris Taylor. And we hope to see you next time. Thank you so much.